Hello and welcome to the old Fliers. Most heads of state use dedicated aircraft as time is precious for them, and there is an element of prestige as well. The first recorded flight by a head of state was October 1910. US ex-President Theodore Roosevelt had a joyride in a Wright Flyer piloted by Arch Hoxsey. It wasn't until 1943 that US President Franklin D. Roosevelt became the first president to fly in an aeroplane whilst in office. His Navy-owned but civilian-operated Boeing 314 Clipper flying boat transported him to the Casablanca Conference, preferring that the president be flown by an Army Air Force aircraft and crew. General Hap Arnold, commander of the US Army Air Force, ordered that a consolidated C-87 transport version of the famous B-24 bomber be converted to fly the Commander-in-Chief. When the Secret Service expressed doubts about the safety of the C-87, the US Army Air Force turned to the Douglas Aircraft Company to build a military transport specifically to accommodate the special needs of the President. The Douglas VC-54C Skymaster was the first aircraft purpose-built to fly the President of the United States. Carrying the Staff Transport VC designation, the aircraft was officially named the Flying White House. However, the aircraft became better known by its unofficial nickname, Sacred Cow, a reference to the high security surrounding the aircraft and its special status. As the only VC-54C built, the aircraft was heavily modified given greater fuel capacity and so on. The unpressurized cabin included an executive conference room with a large desk and a rectangular bulletproof window. For additional comfort, a private lavatory was installed next to the president's seat, and a fold-down bed was concealed behind the sofa. An electric refrigerator in the galley added an uncommon luxury for 1945. A battery-powered elevator was installed at the rear of the aircraft, which allowed President Roosevelt to board the aircraft easily whilst in his wheelchair. Sacred Cow carried President Roosevelt to the Yalta Conference in February 1945. Illustrating the high stakes associated with presidential airlift, the Sacred Cow's serial number was changed for the flight as a special security measure. The trip to Yalta was Roosevelt's only flight aboard the aircraft before his untimely death in April 1945. Roosevelt's successor, Harry S. Truman, used the aircraft extensively during the first 27 months of his administration. In 1953, Dwight D. Eisenhower replaced President Truman. He had made a campaign promise to visit Korea in an effort to end the Korean War. The aircraft he chose was the Lockheed Constellation that was being used by the US Air Force Secretary. Eisenhower named it Columbine II after the flower of his wife Marnie Eisenhower's adopted home state, Colorado. Columbine II was renamed Air Force One after an instance of confused identity. That happened when Eisenhower was flying to Charlotte, North Carolina in 1954. His pilot, Captain Draper, checked in with Air Route Traffic Control Center as Air Force 8610. An Eastern Airlines pilot whose call sign included the numbers 8610 asked if the center was trying to contact him. Both aircraft were vying for the same airspace. A Secret Service agent on the plane noted the confusion and thought the president's plane should have a unique call sign. A meeting of Draper, Civil Aviation Authority, Air Force, Secret Service, and the White House agreed to use the call sign Air Force One when it had the president on board. Columbine II's stint as the presidential aircraft ended 6 months later when Marnie Eisenhower christened a larger Lockheed super constellation as Columbine III, not Air Force One. Toward the end of Eisenhower's second term, Secretary of State John Foster Dulles commented that Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev and other senior Soviet officials had begun using the technologically advanced Tupolev Tu-114 aircraft for their travels, and it was no longer dignified for the presidents of the US to fly in a propeller-driven aircraft. This paved the way for the Air Force's initial procurement of 3 Boeing 707-120 or VC-137A jet aircraft designated SAM, Special Air Missions, 970, 971 and 972. The high-speed jet technology built into these aircraft enabled presidents from Eisenhower through to Nixon to travel long distances more quickly for face-to-face meetings with world leaders. Then Vice President Richard Nixon first used a VC-137A on his visit to Russia in July 1959 for the kitchen debates. The following month, Eisenhower became the first president to fly via jet aircraft when he used SAM 970, nicknamed Queenie, to meet German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer. During Eisenhower's Flight to Peace Goodwill Tour in December 1959, he visited 11 Asian nations, flying 22,000 miles in 19 days, twice as fast as he could have covered that distance in one of the Columbines.
I leave in just a few minutes on a 3-week journey halfway around the world. During this mission of peace and goodwill, I hope to promote a better understanding of America and to learn more of our friends abroad.
Under John F. Kennedy in 1962, the modified long-range Boeing VC-137C Stratoliner, SAM 26000, immediately became an important element of the Kennedy administration. SAM 26000 was in service from 1962 to 1998, serving Presidents Kennedy to Clinton. The US Air Force usually does not have fighter aircraft escort the presidential aircraft over the United States, but it has occurred. The first instance came during the state funeral of John F. Kennedy, when it was followed by 50 Navy and Air Force fighters representing the states of the Union. Johnson used SAM 26000 to visit troops in South Vietnam during the Vietnam War. This aircraft served President Nixon on several flights, including his famous visit to the People's Republic of China in February 1972 and his trip to the Soviet Union later that year, both firsts for an American president.
History was made on May 22, 1972, when Richard Nixon became the first American president to visit Moscow for a summit meeting with the Soviet leader, Communist Party General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev. This first U.S.-Soviet summit had been 3 hard years in the making.
After a period of confrontation, we are entering an era of negotiation. Let all nations know that during this administration, our lines of communication will be open.
Nixon dubbed the plane the Spirit of 76 in honor of the forthcoming bicentennial of the United States. SAM 26000 was replaced in 1972 by another VC-137C, Special Air Mission 27000. In June 1974, while President Nixon was on his way to a scheduled stop in Syria, Syrian fighter jets intercepted Air Force One to act as escorts. The crew had not been informed in advance, so took evasive action. I bet they did. Though Ronald Reagan's 2 terms as president saw no major changes to Air Force One, the manufacturer of the presidential aircraft version of the 747 began during his presidency. The US Air Force issued a request for a proposal in 1985 for 2 wide-body aircraft with a minimum of 3 engines and an unrefueled range of 6,000 miles. Proposals were received from Boeing with the 747 and McDonnell Douglas with the DC-10. The Reagan administration ordered 2 identical 747s to replace the aging 707s. First Lady Nancy Reagan oversaw interior design modelled on the American Southwest. On the 11th of September 2001, President George W. Bush took off in a VC-25 from Sarasota Bradenton International Airport with Colonel Mark Tillman as senior pilot. Air traffic controllers gave Air Force One an ominous warning that a passenger jet was close to Air Force One and was unresponsive to calls. Tillman recalls, "As we got over Gainesville, Florida, we got the word from Jacksonville Center. They said, Air Force One, you have traffic behind you and basically above you that is descending into you. We are not in contact with them as they have shut off their responder." In response to this reported threat, Colonel Tillman said he flew Air Force One over the Gulf of Mexico to test whether the other aircraft would follow. The other jet continued on its route, and Tillman said that it was later explained to him that the airliner had lost its transponder. The second threat came again when Tillman received a message warning of an imminent attack on Air Force One. "We got word from the Vice President and the staff that Angel was next," indicating the classified call sign for Air Force One. "At that point, I asked for fighter support. The President was returned safely to Washington, D.C. US presidents have invited other world leaders to travel with them on Air Force One at times, including Nixon inviting Soviet General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev to travel with him to California from Washington, D.C. in 1973. In 1983, President Reagan and Queen Elizabeth II toured the US West Coast aboard Air Force One. In March 2012, President Obama took British Prime Minister David Cameron to a basketball game in Ohio aboard Air Force One. In the 2023 visit by Joe Biden to Ukraine, to increase secrecy, the Air Force One call sign was not used for the C-32 aircraft used to transport President Joe Biden to Poland. Instead, the call sign was SAM 060. The VC-25As are to be replaced as the cost of maintaining the aging systems on their 30-year-old airframes and less efficient GECF6 engines has begun to surpass the cost of acquiring new aircraft. In 2015, Air Force announced that the Boeing 747-8s would be the next presidential aircraft. In December 2016, President-elect Donald Trump tweeted his opposition to the Air Force One replacement because of its high cost, more than $4 billion. On the 1st of August 2017, Defense One reported that in an effort to pay less for the replacement program, the US Air Force contracted to purchase two of the bankrupt Russian airline Transaero's undelivered 747-8s Intercontinentals from Boeing, which was storing them in the Mojave Desert to prevent corrosion. These airplanes, which were completed in 2013, would be retrofitted with all the essential equipment to serve as the next presidential aircraft, albeit without certain capabilities such as aerial refueling. In September 2020, the US Air Force announced several contracts signed with aircraft manufacturers to begin development of a supersonic aircraft that could function as Air Force One. Contracts have been signed with Exonic, Hermeus.
This is a company that is speeding up the global human transportation network. And we're doing that by building aircraft that can travel at 5 times the speed of sound.
And Boom.
All right, Sean, 3 up and locked.
Test control copies. Looks like a good retraction.
So smooth with the gear up.
Test control, your go. Roll damper.
I'm happy with what I'm seeing from the dampers so far.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and donations always gratefully received.